Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Amina and this is Experiencing Fragrances with Amina. So I wanted to come with a different video, different from what I normally do. Lately I found that I'm kind of obsessed with a certain style of fragrance called Chypre. And I kind of just wanted to explain to you guys what a Chypre fragrance is. I have 7 fragrances from my collection that fall under the Chypre category, and I want to share those with you guys. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoy. Before we start, welcome, obviously. If you're not subscribed, make sure you subscribe, make sure you hit that notification bell. I am nearing 800 subscribers and I'm hoping, I think it's a reach. But I'm hoping to get to 1,000 subscribers by 2021. I think it's a reach, but hopefully we'll get there. So be sure to share the video with your friends, family. Hopefully they like my content enough to subscribe and to join the family so you can see my face some more. Okay, Chypre. Yes, so Chypre is a very vintage style of perfumery. I believe Chypres were created in the early 1900s. So yeah, they've been around for a very long time. So we have many different categories of Chypres. Well, first, before I get there, so Chypre fragrances usually consist of a few specific notes. If a fragrance has these notes and kind of give that Chypre feel, which you will come to know, then it will fall under a Chypre category. So it usually has like a citrus top. We'll have some labdanum or some sort of resins along with oak moss. So back in the day, they would use actual real oak moss, but due to IFRA laws and regulations, now you can only use, I think you can only use just a very small amount of oak moss, and nowadays they kind of can build this oak moss accord using other notes. So in addition to the citrus notes, the resins and oak moss, you can have other additional notes added. So sometimes you'll see some that feature notes of patchouli. You'll see some that feature some additional fruit notes. So that will be considered like a fruity Chypre. You'll have some that are more green, that have a lot of green notes. So those will be considered like green Chypres. And other times you'll have a fragrance that includes lots of floral notes, and those will be floral Chypres. Also, one of my favorites are animalic leathery Chypres, and those are ones that obviously have your oak moss, labdanum, citrus, along with some animalic notes, whether it's civet, castoreum, or just some leather notes. Yeah, I think I have a little bit of everything. I think I have at least one of each of those categories, I think. Let's see. So it only feels right that my first fragrance in this video will be an old one that's been here for a very long time. Very long time. And it's by the house of Guerlain, and it is Mitsouko. EDP. I have the EDP. I don't know if you guys know, but there are other concentrations, including a Parfum and an EDT, and they have different flankers of this as well. But this one is considered a fruity Chypre because it has a peach note in it. In addition to the peach note, it has obviously citrusy notes, lots and lots of oak moss. You'll find rose and jasmine in here as well. You get some spices like cinnamon, vetiver, and of course you get that oak moss. Yeah, this just smells amazing. I mean, I think a lot of people, when they smell this, it will conjure up some memories because it just feels so classic, and I'm sure a lot of us knew a woman at some point in our lives who wore this fragrance, since it's been around forever. But it's just a very classic Chypre. It's very clean smelling, slightly soapy, but smells very sophisticated, very regal. I personally in 2020 love wearing this scent to this day. I'm sure the formulation has changed along the years, being that with Effleurage you can no longer use real oak moss like I said before. So most likely it's going to be like a Chypre accord or an oak moss accord that's used to make this fragrance nowadays. This was a modern formulation. This is not a vintage formulation, although I wish I can get my nose on a vintage formulation. But yeah, Guerlain's Mitsouko is the first one that I'm featuring in my video. So the next Chypre style fragrance that I have in my collection is going to be by Francesca Bianchi. No surprise, you know I'm obsessed. Etruscan water. Can that focus? Etruscan water. So this is a very unique take on Chypres. Normally, the type of fragrance is considered quite clean, a bit soapy, but this one is dirty. There's notes of, I believe it's caraway in here that give it that little dirtiness. But it's very green. There's some citrus notes in here as well. It has everything. Oh, so good. This scent personally did grow on me. But it definitely has that Chypre feel with the oak moss along with the other notes. But what makes this stand out in my opinion is the fact that it's not your typical clean vintage smelling Chypre fragrance. It's it has similar qualities to Mitsouko and a few other Mitsouko and a few others that I have here, but it really stands out because it has that really dirtiness. It kind of reminds me of like wet marshes, but it's so good. It's so good. Francesca's Etruscan water has notes of oak moss, bergamot, ambergris, orris, immortelle, basil, caraway, vetiver, musk, grapefruit, labdanum, petitgrain, tangerine, and jasmine. It's very sexy. This is the sexiest one. Wait, maybe one of the sexiest ones that I have here. So this is also, I would consider, a very complex Chypre because it goes through so many transitions where it's quite fresh in the beginning and then it gets real funky and then it dries down to this really nice smoky vetiver, but still maintains that oak moss feels that reminds you that indeed it is a Chypre. So that is Francesca Bianchi's Etruscan water. The next one I'm going to talk about is from an indie house, another indie house called Rogue Perfume, and this is Chypre Siam. And what makes this fragrance unique is instead of using like typical lemon, bergamot, whatever, they use kaffir lime. And kaffir limes are limes that are used in Thai cuisine. And you can kind of get that feel. It doesn't smell savory at all, but that lime note, the kaffir lime, makes it a little bit unique. But this one also, it smells so vintage. And this is one fragrance that is a modern Chypre because it's made now, you know, now in our times. But it does contain real oak moss. If you're not familiar with Rogue Perfume, they kind of pride themselves on making fragrances that are non-IFRA compliant. So they use real animalics, real oak moss, and other things. But this scent is just so good. Also has that really nice, clean, soapy vibe. It's not dirty like Francesca's Etruscan water, but this one, it's so clean and fluffy. It's just so good. It's so good. And I'm going by notes on Fragrantica, in case you're wondering. So this one by Rogue has notes of kaffir lime, as I said earlier. Also has a basil note, jasmine, ylang ylang, oak moss, civet, benzoin, spices, leather, sandalwood. To me, it's not super animalic, although it does have notes of civet. I would consider, yeah, this is not as animalic as maybe a couple others that I have coming up. But to me, this is one that smells closest to a vintage style Chypre besides the Guerlain. To me, it smells very clean, very sophisticated. It's just a very beautifully structured scent, and I'm so happy to have it. Chypre Siam by Rogue Perfumery. Is it Rogue Perfumery or Rogue Perfume? I don't know. Rogue Perfumery, I was right. The next fragrance is one that I've done a review on not that long ago, and that one is Chanel's Antaeus pour Homme. So this is the only designer fragrance that I have. Only designer Chypres, and it's one of my favorite Chypres. This one is more of a leather animalic Chypre. Like I said, although Chypre Siam says it has civet, I don't really get an animalic vibe. To me, it's very clean. Antaeus pour Homme, though, is very, it's more of a animalic, leathery Chypre. But it has floral notes in here, also has patchouli, obviously has oak moss, there's some lime and lemon in here, I believe, and also bergamot. We have some spices in here, labdanum, so it just ticks all the boxes for falling into this category. But yeah, you guys know I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I love this. Very aromatic, very smooth, sexy. Next one I don't have too much experience with. I have worn it a couple times and I love it. To me, this falls in the category of more of a woodier Chypre, and this one is by MDCI and it's called Chypre Palatine. So this one is, like I said, more of a woodier Chypre. I find it to be one of the smoothest one that I have that I'm talking about today. It's slightly sweeter as well. It's not as tart, it's not sharp, it's just very smooth. A lot of Chypres can start off quite sharp, but this one just is so rounded. It's just well rounded, very well structured. I think this one is a very perfect example of a modern Chypre. So it has all the qualifications of a Chypre. It feels like one, but it kind of has a different energy, if that makes any sense. This one is younger. This one is more innovative, maybe. So a lot of Chypres can come off slightly dense because of the heavy oak moss, but this, like I said, is more of a woodier, sweeter, and also lighter Chypre compared to the others. It doesn't have a strong vintage feel, but it does have a Chypre feel slightly. For me, this is one that if you don't like Chypres, you may like this one because it's not so in your face vintage feeling or old school feeling. So this one has notes of galbanum, aldehydes, clementine, labdanum, hyacinth, lavender, sage, plum, iris, rose, jasmine, gardenia, tolu balsam, oak moss, castoreum, benzoin, vanilla, leather, and mortel styrus causis. A lot is going on in here, but all the notes just fall in line so well. Nothing is fighting for attention. It's just I find it's also quite linear. Everything is just so smooth and lovely. This one is really nice. This one's really nice. This is also one that I need to spend more time with, but I love it so far. From my experience, it's definitely 2 thumbs up for me. The next one is also one that's newer to my collection, and it comes from the house of Zoologist, my only Zoologist fragrance, and it is called Civet. Don't be afraid, okay? Don't be afraid of Civet. It's very interesting. But as soon as I smelled it, I was like, this is giving me very Chypre vibes, but not classic Chypre. But this, to me, is more, It's animalic, but not super duper animalic. I think Antaeus is more animalic than Civet, although it's called Civet. It does have notes of oak moss, some resins, and citrus. But this one is different because it has so many things, but altogether, it kind of has this slight vintage feel that you get from typical Chypres, but it's so unique. It's a very unique one. To me, I get a slight sourness in here. I'm not gonna lie, I think this one is probably my least favorite Chypre style because it has this sourness. The sourness is interesting, but the one thing that I don't like is the sourness along with the slight powderiness that I get in the mid. It goes away after some time and leaves this really beautiful, like musky skin scent. But there's a part in the wearing that I don't like where it's like sour and powdery at the same time. But I think this is a very creative take on a Chypre. Although, like I said, it's named Civet, you may not think of it initially as that kind of fragrance, but for me, it's definitely a Chypre. It's just a very, very modern and unique take on one. So we have resins, civet, tuberose, coffee, ylang ylang, carnation, spices, incense, oak moss, frangipani, Russian leather, orange, heliotrope, musk, lime blossom, black pepper, woodsy notes, hyacinth, Canadian balsam, labdanum, tarragon, vanilla, bergamot, lemon, vetiver. Whew. Yeah, I don't know what's giving me that sourness. Maybe it's that lime blossom. I'm not very familiar with that. Maybe even the tarragon. I've never seen a fragrance that had tarragon. So this is very, like I said, a very unique take on a Chypre, but it's one that I can see the appeal and why people like it. And I like it, don't get me wrong. It's just a part of the wearing that I don't like very much. Anyway, that is Zoologist Civet. I have two more fragrances to talk about. Bear with me, please. Yeah, so this is another one that falls in the leathery, animalic category, but I also find this to be quite spicy and sweet. This one's very complex. This is Memoir Woman by Amouage. This is also a newer acquisition. At least the bottle is. I've been working through a decant of this provided by Dr. Rose, and I fell in love with it. It has, it's like a sweet, spicy leather. Initially, I didn't get the oak moss feel until after I wore it a few times, and I'm like, wait, I think I get that slight vintage, roundness that you get from that oak moss. And then I looked it up, and lo and behold, it fell in that category. Memoir Woman has notes of wormwood, cardamom, pink pepper, mandarin orange. Middle notes are incense, clove, woodsy notes, white flowers, rose, pepper, and jasmine. Base notes, leather, French labdanum, castoreum, styrax, oak moss, and musk. This is a very dark Chypre. This is the darkest one that has a more moodier, more darker, heavier feel out of all the ones that I spoke about today. Yeah, it has a slight smokiness, but to me, I get oak moss, I get spice, I get sweetness with a slight leatheriness and some amberiness as well, because it has some warmth. That could also be coming from the labdanum as well. But yeah, Memoir Woman is, in my opinion, another very modern take on a Chypre, but it's also very complex, which keeps it very, very interesting. Memoir Woman by Amouage, another Chypre. My battery's gonna die, so I have to be quick. The last one also comes from another indie house, and this one comes from the house of Bruno Fazzolari with his Exotic line, and this is Eau de la Narcisse. Yes, so this one is a very a beautiful floral Chypre. It centers around the floral notes of jasmine and narcisse. This one has a very sharp opening. That's typical for a Chypre, but it mellows down very beautifully. I was introduced to this scent by Maite, who kindly sent me a sample that I just blew right through and then bought a sample. I featured this fragrance on the video that I did before called like fragrance samples that I finished and if they're full bottle worthy, and this was definitely one of them. Eau de la Narcisse has notes of bergamot, narcissus, jasmine, orange flower, oak moss, and amber. This is just so beautiful. And this one also is to me, a slightly modern take. Maybe not as modern as Chypre, but this feels like, did I say Chypre? Not as modern as Civet, but this feels slightly vintage, but not vintage at the same time. This feels very well thought out. It's so good. I don't understand how all of these can be so good. Focus, please. Yes, okay, so Eau de la Narcisse is another Chypre fragrance that